At my sister's wedding, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're dead to me. Don't ever contact me again." The entire wedding party gasped. What she didn't know was that her new husband, the billionaire she'd just married, had been the target of my year-long undercover operation with the FBI. And in exactly 6 months, I'd be the one watching him get arrested at their anniversary party. My sister Emma and I used to be best friends. Growing up in a middle-class family in Denver, we shared everything: clothes, secrets, dreams about our future. I was 2 years older and she was the classic little sister who followed me everywhere. Our parents, both teachers, raised us to value education, hard work, and family above all else. Emma was always the more social one, the one who dreamed of designer clothes and fancy cars while I buried myself in accounting textbooks. After college, I became a compliance officer at a mid-sized investment firm, while Emma worked in marketing for a local startup. We lived in the same city, had dinner every Sunday with our parents, and talked almost daily. That all changed when Emma met Richard Castellano at a charity auction in 2019. Richard was everything Emma had ever dreamed of: tall, handsome, charming, and supposedly worth $800 million from his revolutionary investment fund. He drove a different Lamborghini every week, owned a penthouse downtown, and threw parties that local news stations covered like they were royal events. From their first date, I could see Emma changing. She started using words like networking and diversified portfolios in casual conversation, even though she'd never shown interest in finance before. She'd always been confident, but now there was something different, an arrogance that made family dinners uncomfortable. "Richard says people like us think too small," she told me one evening after he'd been courting her for just 2 months. "He says I have so much potential that I'm wasting in my current environment." The way she said, "people like us," made my stomach turn, like we were somehow beneath her now. Within 6 months, Emma had quit her job, moved into Richard's penthouse, and started what she called learning the business. She attended every charity gala, every investment conference, every high society event in Colorado. Her Instagram transformed from casual family photos to carefully staged shots of her in designer gowns at exclusive venues. But the real change wasn't in her lifestyle, it was in how she treated us. The first sign of trouble came during Mom's birthday dinner. Emma arrived 2 hours late, dressed in what she later told us was a $15,000 outfit. She spent the entire meal on her phone, taking calls from what she called international investors. "Sorry, this is a major deal," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Richard's fund is expanding into Asian markets. We're talking hundreds of millions." Dad put down his fork. "Emma, it's your mother's birthday." She finally looked up, and for a moment I saw annoyance flash across her face. "Dad, you don't understand the level we're operating at now. When Richard calls, I have to answer. This isn't some 9-to-5 job." The worst part was how she talked about money. Every conversation somehow turned into her lecturing us about wealth building and generational thinking. She'd criticize Dad's teacher pension, Mom's modest savings account, my limiting beliefs about money. "You could be making so much more, Sarah," she told me after I'd mentioned getting a small promotion. "Richard says compliance officers at real firms make at least $300,000. You're selling yourself short at that little company." When I tried to explain that I liked my job, that not everything was about money, she actually laughed. "That's exactly the mindset that keeps people poor." The breaking point came at Christmas. Emma arrived with Richard for the first time, and it was like watching a performance. He was polite, charming, everything you'd want in a future son-in-law. He praised Mom's cooking, asked Dad thoughtful questions about his work, and even brought expensive gifts for everyone. But I noticed things. The way he checked his phone constantly. The way he deflected specific questions about his business with vague answers about proprietary trading algorithms and global arbitrage opportunities. Most troubling, the way Emma hung on his every word like she was afraid to disagree with him about anything. After dinner, I found myself alone with Richard in Dad's study. He was looking at the family photos, and I thought it might be a chance to get to know him better. "Emma's told me so much about you," I said. "She says you've built something really impressive." His smile was perfect, practiced. "We're always looking for smart people, Sarah. Emma mentioned you work in compliance. That's valuable expertise in our world. What exactly is your fund's strategy?" I asked. It was an innocent question, the kind any finance professional might ask. But something shifted in his expression. Just for a second, I saw calculation behind those charming eyes. "It's quite complex," he said smoothly. "We use sophisticated algorithms to identify market inefficiencies. Most people wouldn't understand the technical aspects." It was a polite way of saying I wasn't smart enough to understand. But here's the thing, I'd been in finance for 8 years. I understood complex trading strategies, derivatives, risk management. His explanation wasn't complex, it was meaningless. That night, I lay awake thinking about our conversation. Something felt off, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Richard proposed 6 months later at another charity gala, with hundreds of Denver's elite watching. The ring was so large it looked fake, though Emma assured everyone it was a 10-carat flawless diamond worth more than most people's houses. The engagement party was held at Richard's downtown penthouse, and Emma made sure we knew we were lucky to be invited. "Richard's guest list is usually much more exclusive," she told us, "but I insisted family should be there." The party was everything you'd expect from someone trying to impress. Ice sculptures, a full orchestra, servers in white gloves offering champagne that probably cost more per bottle than Dad made in a week. Everyone was beautiful, wealthy, and talking about things like market disruption and paradigm shifts. I watched Emma work the room like she'd been born to it. She traded her natural warmth for something colder, more calculated. When she introduced us to people, it felt like an obligation rather than pride. "These are my parents," she'd say to Richard's business associates. "They're both in education." The way she said it made teaching sound like a disease. But the real revelation came when I overheard her talking to a group of other wealthy wives near the bar. "The hardest part about success," Emma was saying, "is dealing with family who don't understand your new life. They want to keep you at their level instead of celebrating your growth." One woman nodded sympathetically. "Richard's doing you a favor by exposing you to our world. Not everyone gets this opportunity." "Exactly," Emma replied. "I'm learning that sometimes you have to leave people behind if they're holding you back." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Was she talking about us? About the family that had supported her, loved her, celebrated every achievement she'd ever had? After the party, I tried to talk to her privately. "Emma, I'm worried about you. This doesn't seem like the person you used to be." Her response was ice cold. "The person I used to be was settling for mediocrity. Richard's shown me what's possible when you think bigger." "But you're shutting us out," I said. "We barely see you anymore." "Sarah, you'll understand someday when you stop limiting yourself." "Richard says." "I don't care what Richard says." I snapped. "I care about my sister who used to call me every day and now treats her own family like we're embarrassing her." The look she gave me was pure disdain. "Maybe because you are embarrassing me. Do you know what it's like trying to explain why my sister works at some tiny firm making barely 6 figures? Why my parents drive 10-year-old cars and shop at Target?" That's when I realized I'd lost her. The Emma I grew up with who used to defend our family fiercely was gone. In her place was this stranger who measured people's worth by their bank accounts. The wedding planning was a nightmare. Emma turned into a bridezilla, but not the usual kind. She was a snobzilla, constantly talking about how everything had to be at Richard's level. The venue, the flowers, the catering, everything was chosen not because she loved it, but because it would impress Richard's wealthy friends. She even tried to get Mom to lose weight for the wedding photos. "Richard's hiring a professional photographer," she said, "and I want everyone to look their best. Maybe we could get you a personal trainer." Mom cried that night. I'd never seen her cry over something like that, but watching her daughter become someone who valued appearance over substance broke something in her. The worst part was the bridal shower. Emma had 2 of them, one for Richard's crowd, which we weren't invited to, and one for family and old friends, which felt like a consolation prize. During our family shower, Emma spent the entire time talking about her new life, her new friends, the places Richard was taking her. Every story was designed to show us how much better her life was now. "Richard's taking me to the Monaco Grand Prix next month," she announced while opening gifts. "Apparently it's quite the social event. All the important European families attend." When our cousin asked if she'd miss Denver, Emma actually laughed. "Miss this? We're already looking at properties in Manhattan and Monaco. Richard says Denver was fine for getting started, but real wealth operates on a global scale." I watched our grandmother's face crumble. She'd lived in Denver for 80 years, raised 6 children there, built a life there. To Emma, it was now just a stepping stone to something better. As Emma's wedding approached, I couldn't shake my uneasiness about Richard. Something about his business didn't add up, but I couldn't put my finger on what bothered me. My background in compliance meant I was trained to spot red flags in financial operations. Richard's explanations of his business were always vague, full of buzzwords but light on specifics. When I tried to look up his fund online, I found glossy marketing materials but no real substance about their investment strategy or track record. The breakthrough came 3 weeks before the wedding. I was at a compliance conference in Chicago, attending a session on Ponzi scheme detection. The presenter, an FBI agent named Special Agent Patricia Morrison, was describing the warning signs of fraudulent investment operations. "Sophisticated Ponzi schemes often target high-net-worth individuals," she explained. "The operators are typically charismatic, socially connected, and promise exclusive access to high-return, low-risk investments. They use social proof showing off wealth and lifestyle to attract new investors." My blood ran cold as she continued. "These schemes often feature vague investment strategies that can't be clearly explained, consistent returns regardless of market conditions, and operators who discourage investors from asking detailed questions by suggesting they're too complex for outsiders to understand." She was describing Richard perfectly. After the session, I approached Agent Morrison during the break. My hands were shaking as I introduced myself. I think someone in my family might be involved with something like this," I said quietly. She gave me her card. "Call me. Even if you're wrong, it's better to check." That night, I spent hours researching everything I could find about Richard Castellano and his fund, Pinnacle Investment Solutions. The more I dug, the more concerned I became. His fund claimed to have $2.3 billion in assets under management, but I couldn't find any record of significant institutional investors or pension funds backing them. For a fund that size, that was virtually impossible. His claimed returns were suspiciously consistent, 12 to 15% annually, regardless of market conditions. Even the best hedge funds had years of losses or lower returns. But Richard's fund apparently never had a down year. Most troubling, I found records of at least 6 smaller investment firms that had folded in cities where Richard had previously operated. Each time, the founder had disappeared before authorities could investigate fully. I called Agent Morrison the next morning. "I need to report a suspected Ponzi scheme," I said. "And I think my sister is about to marry the person running it." Meeting with the FBI felt surreal. Agent Morrison brought her partner, Special Agent David Chin, and they set up the meeting at a nondescript federal building downtown. Walking through security to meet with federal agents about my future brother-in-law was not how I'd expected my week to go. "Before we start," Agent Morrison said, "I want you to understand the seriousness of what you're alleging. Investigating someone requires substantial evidence, and if you're wrong, there could be legal consequences for false reporting." I showed them everything I'd compiled, the inconsistent business information, the impossible returns, the pattern of failed firms in Richard's wake. Agent Chin took notes while Agent Morrison asked detailed questions about Richard's lifestyle, his claims about his wealth, and his relationship with Emma. "How much money has your sister invested?" Agent Chin asked. "I don't think she has any money to invest," I replied. "She quit her job when they started dating. As far as I know, he supports her completely." "That's actually common," Agent Morrison explained. "The spouse or partner becomes financially dependent, which makes them less likely to ask difficult questions. They also become unwitting legitimacy shields. Having a beautiful, intelligent woman at their side makes the operation seem more credible." The thought of Emma being used that way made me sick. "We've actually been tracking Mr. Castellano for about 8 months, Agent Chin revealed. "We have some preliminary evidence suggesting fraudulent activity, but we need more. Someone with inside access could be invaluable." They were asking me to spy on my sister's fiancé. "What would that involve?" I asked. "Attending social events, documenting conversations about the business, maybe identifying other investors," Agent Morrison explained. "Nothing that would put you in legal jeopardy, but information that could help us build a case." I thought about Emma, about how she'd changed, about the way she now looked at our family like we were obstacles to her happiness. But I also thought about all the innocent people who might be losing their life savings to Richard's scheme. "If he's really running a Ponzi scheme," I said, "and it collapses, Emma will lose everything too, won't she?" "Spouses of Ponzi operators often face serious financial and legal consequences," Agent Chin confirmed. "Even if they're not directly involved, they can lose everything when assets are seized for restitution to victims." The irony wasn't lost on me. By helping the FBI investigate Richard, I might actually be protecting Emma, even though she'd never see it that way. "What do you need me to do?" Over the next hour they explained the operation. I would wear a wire to social events, document conversations, and report back regularly. They emphasized that I should never actively seek information, just observe and record what I saw and heard naturally. "The most important thing," Agent Morrison stressed, "is your safety. If you ever feel uncomfortable or threatened, you call us immediately and we pull you out." They also made it clear that Emma could never know. If she suspected I was investigating Richard, it could compromise the entire operation and potentially put me in danger. "One more thing," Agent Chin said as we wrapped up. "Are you prepared for what happens if we're right? Your sister won't just lose her lifestyle, she'll likely face public humiliation, possible legal scrutiny, and financial ruin. And she'll probably blame you for it." I sat quietly for a long moment, thinking about the Emma I'd grown up with versus the stranger she'd become. "If Richard is really defrauding people," I finally said, "then stopping him is more important than protecting Emma's feelings. She wouldn't want to be part of something like this if she knew the truth. At least I hoped the real Emma wouldn't." Emma's wedding was held at the Four Seasons, with over 300 guests and enough flowers to stock a botanical garden. Richard had spared no expense, though I now knew it was probably other people's money he was spending. I wore the wire the FBI had given me, a device so small and sophisticated that even I forgot about it most of the time. My job was simple: mingle, listen, and document anything related to Richard's business. The guest list was a who's who of Denver's wealthy elite, plus a surprising number of out-of-state visitors who introduced themselves as Richard's international associates. I recognized several names from Forbes lists, which made the FBI's job both more important and more complicated. During the cocktail hour, I found myself in conversation with a group of Richard's investors. They were discussing their returns with the kind of excitement usually reserved for lottery winners. 15% last quarter, even with the market volatility, one man was saying. "Richard's algorithm is remarkable. I've moved most of my portfolio to Pinnacle." Another investor nodded enthusiastically. "My financial advisor was skeptical at first, but the numbers don't lie. I'm finally going to be able to retire at 55. I felt sick listening to them. These weren't faceless victims. They were real people planning their futures around returns that probably didn't exist. The ceremony itself was beautiful, and for a moment watching Emma walk down the aisle, I saw glimpses of my real sister. She looked radiant, truly happy, and I wondered if I was making a terrible mistake. But then came the reception and the performance resumed. Emma's maid of honor speech was more like a business presentation about their power couple status and their plans to disrupt traditional wealth management. Even on her wedding day, everything was about money and status. The moment that sealed my commitment to the investigation came during Emma's speech thanking the wedding guests. Richard and I are so grateful to be surrounded by people who understand vision, who aren't afraid to think big, she said, looking directly at our family table when she emphasized, who understand vision. Then she said something that broke my heart. We're especially thankful for our real family, the people who've supported our dreams and believed in our success. She wasn't talking about us. She was talking about Richard's investors and business associates. After the speeches, I approached Emma for what I hoped would be a private moment between sisters. You look beautiful, I told her genuinely. I hope you're happy. Her smile was cool. I am. Richard and I are building something incredible together. Too bad not everyone in the family can see that. Emma, you're still my sister. That hasn't changed. Hasn't it? She looked me up and down, taking in my off-the-rack dress and modest jewelry. Sarah, I tried to help you understand what's possible, but you're determined to stay small. Richard says some people are just wired for mediocrity. Is that really what you think of me? Of Mom and Dad? Her expression hardened. I think you're jealous. I think you can't stand that I've moved beyond what our family thought was possible. And honestly, I'm tired of pretending otherwise. Emma. Just don't. After tonight, I think it's better if we don't see each other for a while. You're toxic to my new life, Sarah. You make me remember small thinking, and I can't afford that anymore. She walked away without another word, leaving me standing alone in the middle of her wedding reception. That night, I called Agent Morrison and told her I was all in. Over the next 6 months, I attended every event Richard and Emma hosted. Gallery openings, charity auctions, business conferences, anywhere wealthy people gathered to network and, more importantly, to invest in Pinnacle. What I discovered was even worse than I'd initially suspected. Richard wasn't just running a simple Ponzi scheme, he was operating what the FBI called a lifestyle Ponzi, using the facade of extreme wealth to attract investors who wanted access to his exclusive world. The parties at their penthouse were essentially recruitment events. Richard would casually mention his latest opportunity to guests, making it seem like an exclusive invitation rather than a sales pitch. Emma played her part perfectly, charming potential investors with stories about their jet-setting lifestyle and Richard's business genius. At one particularly revealing party, I overheard Richard talking to a group of potential investors about a ground floor opportunity in what he called algorithmic cryptocurrency arbitrage. The returns are extraordinary, he said, swirling an expensive whiskey, but I can only take on sophisticated investors who understand discretion. The strategy only works if we keep the investor pool small and exclusive. One of the listeners, a retired CEO named William Bradford, seemed interested but cautious. What kind of returns are we talking about? Our worst quarter last year was 18%, Richard replied smoothly. But I have to warn you, once you see these kinds of numbers, it's hard to go back to traditional investments. I was recording everything, but what struck me most was how believable Richard was. He didn't sound like a scammer, he sounded like a visionary sharing insider knowledge with friends. Emma was even more convincing because she genuinely believed everything she was saying. When she told people about their lifestyle, about Richard's success, about their bright future together, she wasn't lying, she was just repeating lies she'd been told. The saddest part was watching her cut ties with anyone who expressed skepticism. When her college roommate questioned why Richard's fund wasn't more widely known, Emma stopped taking her calls. When our cousin asked pointed questions about the business model at a family gathering, Emma disinvited her from future events. Emma was systematically isolating herself from anyone who might help her see the truth. The FBI's investigation was proceeding carefully. They were building cases not just against Richard, but against a network of similar operators across the country. Agent Morrison explained that these schemes often work together, referring investors between them and sharing strategies. Your brother-in-law is part of what we're calling a Ponzi network, she told me during one of our regular briefings. When one scheme gets too risky, they'll refer investors to another operator in the network, keeping the money flowing while spreading the legal risk. They showed me evidence of Richard's connections to at least 4 other suspected Ponzi operators in different states. The scope was staggering, potentially billions in fraudulent investments across dozens of schemes. How much money has Richard actually stolen? I asked. We estimate Pinnacle alone has taken in about $400 million over the past 3 years, Agent Chin replied. But only about $50 million of that actually exists. The rest has been paid out to earlier investors or spent on lifestyle expenses. The math was sobering. If the scheme collapsed today, investors would recover maybe 12 cents on every dollar they'd invested. What about Emma? Will she face charges? That depends on what we find, Agent Morrison said. If she's genuinely unaware of the fraud, she's as much a victim as the investors. But if we find evidence she knowingly participated. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The breakthrough came during Emma and Richard's 6-month anniversary party. It was held at their penthouse with about 50 of their closest friends, most of whom were major investors in Pinnacle. Richard had been drinking more than usual, and as the evening progressed he became increasingly careless in his conversations. I was talking to a group near the bar when I heard him on the phone in his study, the door slightly ajar. No, we can't liquidate the Denver accounts yet, he was saying. I need at least another quarter to set up the Cayman transfers. Tell Miami to slow down their redemption rate, we're not ready for a major outflow. My blood ran cold. He was talking about moving money offshore and manipulating withdrawal requests, classic signs of a collapsing Ponzi scheme. When he emerged from the study I was positioned where I could naturally strike up a conversation. The wire was recording everything. Richard, great party as always, I said. Emma mentioned you're expanding internationally? His smile was strained. Always exploring opportunities, Sarah. The global markets never sleep. Must be stressful managing so much money. What happens if everyone wants to withdraw at once? It was a loaded question and for a moment his mask slipped. That's not how sophisticated investing works. Our investors understand long-term value creation. But hypothetically, if there was a market panic and everyone wanted their money back simultaneously. Sarah, he said, his voice sharper now, I hope you're not listening to media fear-mongering. Our fund is structured to handle any realistic scenario. What he didn't say was more telling than what he did say. Any legitimate fund manager would have explained their liquidity management, their cash reserves, their redemption procedures. Richard deflected because he couldn't explain what didn't exist. Later that evening I witnessed something that sealed the case. Richard's business partner, a man named Marcus Webb, arrived late and pulled Richard aside for what they thought was a private conversation near the kitchen. The SEC is asking questions about the Tampa operation, Marcus said quietly. We need to accelerate the timeline. How much time do we have? Richard asked. Maybe 6 months, maybe less. The documentary evidence is too scattered, they'll need more time to piece it together unless someone talks. No one's going to talk. Everyone's making too much money. Except the Tampa clients. Some of them are asking for full redemptions. Richard's face went hard. Then we give them just enough to keep them quiet and buy ourselves time. Use the new Denver money. They were talking about using fresh investor funds to pay redemption requests. The classic Ponzi scheme shell game. But more importantly, they'd confirmed the FBI's suspicions about a broader network of fraudulent operations. When I reported this conversation to Agent Morrison, she made the decision to accelerate their timeline. We're moving to the arrest phase, she told me. Richard's planning to flee the country within 6 months and we can't let that happen. What about Emma? We'll know more after the arrests. But Sarah, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get very public very quickly. Your sister's world is about to collapse completely. I spent the next few weeks in a strange limbo, attending social events and family gatherings while knowing that everything was about to change. Emma was planning their first anniversary party, talking excitedly about Richard's surprise, a private jet trip to Monaco for a month-long business vacation. I realized they were planning to run. The anniversary party was held on a Friday night in March, exactly 1 year after Emma and Richard's wedding. They'd rented the entire top floor of the St. Regis, with panoramic views of the Denver skyline and enough champagne to float a yacht. Emma looked radiant, wearing a dress that probably cost more than I made in a month. She was in her element, playing hostess to 200 of Denver's wealthiest residents, including several city council members, a state senator, and half the city's major CEOs. Richard was unusually nervous, checking his phone constantly and having whispered conversations with Marcus Webb in corners. I suspected they were monitoring news from Tampa, where the FBI was preparing simultaneous raids. At 9:47 p.m., exactly 1 year and 6 months after I'd first contacted the FBI, everything changed. The elevator doors opened and instead of late-arriving party guests, 6 FBI agents in bulletproof vests stepped into the ballroom. Agent Morrison was in the lead, her badge clearly visible, followed by agents carrying boxes of evidence and arrest warrants. The room went dead silent. 200 people in designer clothes suddenly looked like deer in headlights, champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. Richard Castellano, Agent Morrison announced, her voice carrying clearly through the silent ballroom, you're under arrest for wire fraud, securities fraud, and money laundering. Richard's face went white. For a moment I thought he might try to run, but there was nowhere to go. The agents had positioned themselves at all the exits. Emma's reaction was heartbreaking. She looked completely confused, like someone had started speaking a foreign language. There must be some mistake, she said, rushing to Richard's side. He hasn't done anything wrong. Ma'am, please step back, one of the agents said gently but firmly. That's when Emma saw me. I was standing near the bar with the other guests, but something in my expression must have given me away. Her eyes widened as realization dawned. Sarah, she whispered. Sarah, what's happening? Agent Morrison was reading Richard his rights, but Emma wasn't listening. She was staring at me with growing horror as she put the pieces together. You knew, she said, her voice barely audible over the chaos of the arrests. You knew this was going to happen. I wanted to explain, to tell her I was trying to protect her, but this wasn't the time or place. Richard was being led away in handcuffs, Marcus Webb was being arrested near the kitchen, and the remaining party guests were being questioned by agents about their investments. Emma stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom, her perfect anniversary party transforming into a crime scene around her. "Ma'am," Agent Morrison approached Emma gently, "we're going to need to ask you some questions." "Questions about what?" Emma demanded. "I don't know anything about any crimes. About your husband's business, about your lifestyle, about what you knew and when you knew it." That's when Emma broke down. Not the elegant crying of movies, but ugly, heaving sobs as the reality of her situation crashed over her. "I wanted to go to her, to hold her like I had when we were kids, but I couldn't. Not yet." The story broke on every major news outlet within hours. Billionaire lifestyle was Ponzi scheme facade, ran in the Denver Post. Socialite sister helps FBI bring down investment fraud, was the headline in the Wall Street Journal. Emma's face was on the front page of every newspaper in Colorado, usually next to photos of her at charity galas or society events. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Beautiful socialite wife, charismatic fraud husband, sister who worked with the FBI to bring him down. The penthouse was seized within days. Emma was allowed to take personal items, clothes, jewelry, photos, but everything else belonged to the government now, part of the asset recovery process to repay defrauded investors. She had nowhere to go except back to our parents' house, the same modest home she'd been embarrassed to acknowledge just months earlier. I'll never forget seeing her walk up that familiar driveway, carrying 2 suitcases that contained all that remained of her glamorous life. Mom and Dad welcomed her with open arms, of course. They'd never stopped loving her, even when she'd made it clear she was ashamed of them. But Emma couldn't accept their kindness. She was drowning in humiliation, rage, and the crushing realization that everything she'd believed about her life was a lie. Our first conversation after the arrest was brutal. "How long?" she demanded when we were finally alone in her old bedroom. "How long did you know?" "About 8 months, I admitted. 8 months. She repeated it like she couldn't believe it. "You watched me plan that anniversary party, knowing it would end with my husband being arrested. You let me invite all those people, knowing they'd witness my public humiliation." "Emma, I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" She laughed bitterly. "You destroyed my life. You destroyed everything I worked for, everything I built. Everything you built was based on lies and stolen money. You don't get to decide that," she screamed. "You don't get to play God with my life because you decided Richard was a criminal." The conversation went in circles for hours. Emma alternated between rage at me for betraying her and denial about Richard's crimes. She convinced herself that he was innocent, that the FBI had made a mistake, that somehow this would all be resolved and her life would go back to normal. But the evidence was overwhelming. Richard's trial made front-page news for months. Investors testified about losing their life savings. Former business partners revealed the scope of the network. Financial experts explained how the scheme worked, how sophisticated the deception had been. Emma attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery behind Richard, still believing in his innocence even as prosecutors laid out $400 million in fraudulent transactions. The verdict was guilty on all counts. Richard was sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. Emma's world didn't just collapse, it imploded. The lifestyle she'd become addicted to vanished overnight. The friends who'd surrounded her at charity galas and investment conferences disappeared the moment the arrests made headlines. The social status she'd prized above everything turned to social pariah status. But the worst part wasn't losing the money or the lifestyle. The worst part was facing the truth about who she'd become. Living back in our parents' house, wearing her old clothes from college because her designer wardrobe had been seized as evidence, Emma had to confront what she'd sacrificed for Richard's world. She'd lost her career momentum, her savings, her relationships, and most painfully, her sense of self. The first month was the hardest. Emma barely left her room, refusing to see friends or answer calls from reporters. She'd built her identity around being Richard's wife, around being wealthy and successful and better than her middle-class origins. Without that, she didn't know who she was. Mom and Dad tried to help, but Emma was trapped in a cycle of shame and anger. She was ashamed of being back in her childhood bedroom, angry at me for ruining her life, and devastated by the realization that the past 2 years had been built on lies. "I feel so stupid," she told me during one of our few honest conversations. "Everyone must think I'm the biggest idiot in Colorado. How did I not see what he was doing?" "Because he was good at it," I said. "Emma, Richard fooled investment professionals, wealthy businesspeople, financial advisors. This wasn't about you being naive. This was about him being a sophisticated criminal." But Emma couldn't hear that yet. She needed someone to blame, and I was the obvious target. "If you hadn't interfered," she said, "maybe I could have convinced him to stop. Maybe I could have saved our marriage, saved the business." It was heartbreaking to watch her cling to these delusions, but I understood. Accepting that Richard had used her, that their entire relationship was part of his criminal enterprise, meant accepting that she'd wasted 2 years of her life and hurt the people who truly loved her. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Emma wasn't charged with any crimes. The FBI determined she was genuinely unaware of Richard's activities, but she faced civil lawsuits from defrauded investors who claimed she'd benefited from the stolen money. Every designer dress, every piece of jewelry, every luxury vacation was scrutinized. Emma had to provide detailed accounting of everything Richard had given her, and most of it was seized for victim restitution. The psychological evaluation was almost worse than the financial reckoning. Court-appointed therapists determined that Emma had been financially groomed, slowly isolated from her support system and made emotionally dependent on Richard's approval and lifestyle. He targeted her specifically, the therapist explained to our family. Young, intelligent but from a modest background. Someone who would be impressed by wealth and status, who would work hard to maintain access to that lifestyle. Learning that her relationship had been calculated, strategic, part of Richard's criminal methodology, broke something fundamental in Emma. She'd thought she was special, chosen, elevated. Instead she'd been a mark. Recovery wasn't linear. Some days Emma seemed to understand what had happened, expressing gratitude that the scheme had been exposed before she'd gotten in deeper. Other days she was consumed by rage at me, at the FBI, at the justice system that had destroyed an innocent man. The turning point came 6 months after Richard's sentencing. Emma received a letter forwarded through her lawyer, one of dozens from people affected by the scheme. This one was from Margaret Williams, a 67-year-old widow who'd invested her late husband's life insurance payout with Pinnacle, hoping to secure her retirement. She'd lost everything, her home, her savings, her future security. But Margaret's letter wasn't angry. Instead, she thanked Emma for cooperating with the investigation, for helping expose the fraud before even more people could be hurt. "I know this must have been devastating for you too," Margaret wrote. "I hope you can find peace knowing that your courage helped prevent other families from losing everything like I did." Emma cried reading that letter. Really cried for the first time since the arrests. Not tears of self-pity or rage, but tears of genuine remorse for the harm that had been done. That night she came to my room, just like when we were kids and she'd had a nightmare. "I don't know how to live with this," she whispered. "All those people lost everything because of him. Because of me. Not because of you," I said firmly. "You didn't know. But I should have known. I chose not to ask questions because I liked the lifestyle too much. I chose to believe his lies because they made me feel special." It was the first time Emma had taken any responsibility for her choices, even the unconscious ones. "What do I do now?" she asked. "How do I move forward knowing that my happiness was built on other people's suffering?" I didn't have easy answers. But I knew Emma was finally ready to start rebuilding, not the fantasy life Richard had created, but a real life based on real values. The next morning, Emma asked Dad to help her write a public statement. Not a legal document or a media interview, but a genuine apology to Richard's victims and to our family. She published it as an open letter in the Denver Post. "My name is Emma Harrison Castellano and I was married to Richard Castellano, who defrauded hundreds of investors of their life savings. I am writing to take responsibility for my part in this tragedy, even though I was unaware of the criminal activities. I allowed myself to be seduced by wealth and status. I turned my back on the family that raised me with strong values because I was embarrassed by their modest lifestyle. I participated in events designed to recruit new victims, even though I didn't know that's what they were. Most shamefully, I dismissed the concerns of people who tried to warn me, including my own sister, because I didn't want to hear anything that might threaten my new life. I cannot undo the harm that was done, but I can use my experience to warn others. If someone's lifestyle seems too good to be true, if they can't clearly explain their business, if they isolate you from family and friends who ask questions, these are warning signs I ignored because I didn't want to see them. I am deeply sorry for the role I played in this scheme, even unknowingly. I am working with authorities to ensure all assets are recovered for victim restitution. And I am committed to spending the rest of my life making amends for the damage that was done." The response was mixed. Some people appreciated her honesty and accountability. Others felt she was trying to rehabilitate her image. But for Emma, the response didn't matter as much as finally telling the truth. 2 years later, Emma is a different person in the best possible way. She's back to being the sister I grew up with, but stronger, more grounded, more aware of what really matters. She went back to school using financial aid and student loans like millions of other people, to get certified as a victim advocate specializing in financial crimes. The work doesn't pay much, but Emma says it's the most meaningful thing she's ever done. "Every person I help means Richard hurt one less family," she told me. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it makes something good come from something terrible." She speaks at financial literacy seminars, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about the psychological tactics used by white-collar criminals. The presentations are difficult, reliving her mistakes, facing rooms full of people who might judge her, but the feedback shows they're making a difference. Emma also reconciled with our parents, not by pretending the past didn't happen, but by acknowledging how badly she'd treated them and working to rebuild their relationship on honest ground. "I spent 2 years thinking I was better than you," she told them during one of our family dinners. "The truth is you're better than I'll ever be. You raised me with real values and I threw them away for fool's gold." Dad cried that night, happy tears for the first time in years. Emma and I have a different relationship now too. The hero worship of childhood is gone, replaced by mutual respect between two adults who've both made difficult choices. She thanked me for helping stop Richard even though it cost her everything she thought she wanted. "You saved me from becoming someone I wouldn't be able to live with," she said. "If the scheme had continued, if more people had been hurt while I played hostess to recruitment parties, I don't think I could have forgiven myself. Richard is serving his 45-year sentence at a federal prison in Colorado. Emma filed for divorce while he was awaiting sentencing, and she hasn't had any contact with him since. She says she doesn't hate him. Hate requires caring, and she's worked hard to stop caring about someone who never really existed. The investors recovered about 30 cents on every dollar through asset seizures and restitution proceedings. It wasn't enough, it never is with Ponzi schemes, but it was more than many victims of financial fraud ever see. Margaret Williams, the widow who wrote Emma that first letter, has become an unlikely friend. They work together on investor protection initiatives, two women from very different backgrounds united by their experience with Richard's deception. As for me, I left compliance work after the trial. The experience showed me I wanted to work more directly in law enforcement, so I joined the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Agent Morrison became my mentor, and I now investigate cases similar to Richard's operation. The best revenge against people like your former brother-in-law, Agent Morrison told me, is making sure they can't hurt anyone else. Every case I work, every scheme I help uncover, every fraudster I help arrest is a victory for the Margaret Williams of the world, ordinary people who trusted the wrong person with their life savings. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I could have handled things differently. Maybe I could have tried harder to warn Emma directly before involving the FBI. Maybe there was a way to expose Richard's crimes without devastating my sister's life in the process. But then I remember the investors' testimonies at his trial. The retired teachers who lost their pensions. The young families who lost their children's college funds. The elderly couples who had to move in with their children because they could no longer afford their homes. Every month I delayed the investigation would have meant more victims, more families destroyed by Richard's greed. The hardest lesson I learned is that sometimes protecting the people you love means making choices they'll hate you for. Emma hated me for months after Richard's arrest, and I don't blame her. From her perspective, I destroyed her happiness to satisfy my own moral objections. But love isn't about making people happy in the moment. It's about doing what's best for them in the long run, even when they can't see it. Emma learned different lessons. She learned that wealth without ethics is worthless. She learned that isolating yourself from people who challenge you is dangerous. Most importantly, she learned that her worth isn't determined by her bank account or social status. I thought money would make me a better person, she reflected recently. But money just made me more of what I already was. When I was insecure and status hungry, money made me arrogant and cruel. When I started focusing on character instead of status, money became just a tool to help others. The experience also taught our family about the importance of staying connected, even when someone is pushing you away. Emma tried to cut us off, but Mom and Dad never stopped loving her, never stopped being available when she needed them. That unconditional love is what caught her when her artificial world collapsed. For anyone watching this who recognizes warning signs in their own life or family, I want you to know that it's never too late to ask questions. If someone's success story doesn't add up, if they're isolating you from people who care about you, if they discourage you from seeking independent advice about major financial decisions, these are red flags worth investigating. And if you're the person trying to warn someone you love about a potentially dangerous relationship or business arrangement, be prepared for them to resist. People don't want to believe they've been fooled, especially when the illusion is pleasant. But don't give up. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dangerous choices, even if it damages your relationship in the short term. Emma's story had a happy ending because people who loved her refused to let her disappear into Richard's world completely. Even when she rejected us, even when she was cruel and condescending, we never stopped being her family. When her artificial world collapsed, we were still there to catch her. The FBI estimates that Richard's network defrauded investors of over $2 billion across multiple states. That's not just numbers on a spreadsheet. That's thousands of real families whose lives were devastated by sophisticated criminals who preyed on their dreams and trust. But here's what gives me hope. Every person who learns to recognize these warning signs, every family that stays connected despite pressure to separate, every professional who reports suspicious activity they encounter, we're all part of the defense against people like Richard Castellano. My sister married a billionaire and cut off our family. She thought his empire made her superior to the people who raised her with love and values. What she didn't know was that empires built on lies always collapse eventually. And when they do, the only thing left standing is the relationships you didn't sacrifice for fool's gold. Something seems too good to be true, it usually is. Trust your instincts, protect your family, and never let money become more important than the people who love you for who you are, not what you have. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below.